everyone, my name is Jordan Marshall and I'm the Chief Reporter at Building Magazine. I'll also be chairing today's webinar on how technology is supporting the rise of modular construction. I'd like to start things off by welcoming our panel, and so we have Ben Warbank, BIM Strategy and Partnerships Manager at Viewpoint, Cathal McMullen, Managing Director at Keen Group, Stephen Whiteman, Regional Director and MMC Lead at Faithful and Gould, and Matt Benyon, CEO at Reds 10. So the session today, which I'm really excited to be a part of, is going to focus on what the increasing benefits of using modular construction are, what technologies have driven a rise in modular, and what tools and software are available to enable offsite and modular construction to reach its full potential. So the way today's discussion is going to run is that each of our panelists is going to give an individual presentation on the topic at hand before we move on to a Q&A session. I'd just love to stress to our audience, please send through those questions at any time. We're going to try and cover off as many of them as possible, and the earlier they come in, I can work on grouping them so we can cover off as many as we can. So we've got a huge registration today, we need to try and cover off as much of that as we can for you guys. That's probably enough from me, and so Ben is going to be kicking off our discussion today. So Ben, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Is always a good place to start.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Ben.
Super. Okay. As has been said, I'm Ben Warbank and I'm the BIM Strategy and Partnerships Manager for Viewpoint in the EMEA. There we go. Right. So I'm going to attempt in the next 8 minutes, which is quite an ask, to set the scene for my colleagues on the coalface and answer these questions at a really high level, so to kind of set the scene, as I say. So let's start off with, well, why? So modern methods of construction, of which modular is a key component, are supposed to deliver faster. So that's both delivery and the construction of the asset. Reduced costs, so that's really mass production and efficiencies through repeated work. Reduced waste, allowing you to monitor and measure how things are going. Reduced emissions, again, monitoring and measuring them. And reduced on-site labour, so that's effectively assembly rather than construction on site. And of course, this should lead to a safer environment. So those are some really high level pictures as to why we're doing this. So why now and why not sooner? And that's a kind of key question for me. So 15 years ago, a really BIM obsessed architect, that was me, went to a conference and saw a presentation by a Finnish modular timber house builder. And they had digitized the entire process. They had tagged the trees in the forest, taken them to the mill, then onto the factory. The lorry loading was all BIMmed, if you like, and the processes on site as well. Those assembly processes were all digitized. And furthermore, these were really good, well-designed buildings. I thought they were absolutely brilliant. So I went and had a chat with the presenter afterwards. And I said, well, goodness me, you know, this is amazing. How have you done this? And he said, the first thing he said was, well, it was a huge investment. But he said the main thing is that in Finland, it's dark and cold for half the year. And factories are warm. And site assembly in the summer months is therefore quicker. So what I think this tells us is that there is a need, you know, to modernize our industry, as in BIM and everything else. There is a need to have strong drivers. So let's just talk for a minute about the current drivers to modular. So despite the snow in this picture, we now, of course, have the climate crisis, and that is an absolutely key driver, with the need increasingly for sustainable practice. We also have government drivers. So here is the Construction 2025 paper. And we can see that that sets out the need for us to be faster, cheaper, and more sustainable. But it's not the only thing. Dare one go there. Here is, and where I'm going, of course, is Brexit. So here is the headline from 2 days ago in Building, and it's identifying some real worries with regard to Labour. And of course, our source of brilliant Eastern European labour trained at other people's expense has dried up. And I think this leads to a far greater demand for the automation of processes and repetitive practices, which to a certain extent, we're obviously going to have to address our skills shortage too, but to a certain extent can alleviate these problems for us. So let's talk technology and what tools we're using. So I think it's really important to say that BIM is an absolutely key component to this whole process of modern methods of construction. So the hanging information off a GLUID, a unique identifier against a particular element of a building, enables us to do far more than we've ever been able to do before in terms of tracking and organizing what we're doing. And of course, when we are using factory process and going to site and manufacturing, this becomes really important. So again, I think another reason why things are only just kicking off is that sort of whole interoperability and data transfer issue. And Trimble, of course, have been key drivers of Open BIM for some time. I think the other thing to talk about, again, even within the Trimble world, is this need to make the effort to get data from design through the construction process and out into the operational phase of a building where so much of the cost resides. And part of that, again, is mobile technology. So all of this now has to be available on our tablets and our phones on site. So whilst it was possible 15 years ago, the investment had to be huge. And the problems of interoperability and people using different bits of technology were far greater than they are now. And these are all things that I think are being addressed right now. And of course, you know, with Viewpoint and Trimble, it is the constructability that is so important. So much of our software is now about how you manage these processes. So, you know, if I think about something we've done recently with Lang O'Rourke on Hinkley Point, you know, they are not using 2D drawings at all. They are using a Tekla model and using Connect and Field View to document their site processes and transfer data from element to element within a 3D environment. And this is a slide that we presented to the Centre for Digital Built Britain last year, looking at where you know, we may go with the Viewpoint part of the business. And again, we're looking at how things, you know, in particular about how data is transferred and how you manage to have that thread, that golden thread of information, that traceability of all of those processes. So this is where I briefly put my architect's cravat on and talk about beauty. And this is a big question in modular, and I hear it time and time again from my architect colleagues, you know, is modular antithetical to a good building? Well, I think it's important to say that I think this is a driver too. Here is the housing developer's favourite dinner guest, our Secretary of State for Housing, Robert Jenrick, and he's requiring that, you know, we work on the beauty of things. So the first thing is, I think it's really clear You know, those finished buildings I saw 15 years ago were beautifully designed. So I think it's not antithetical to producing beautiful things. It's actually down to designer skill, as it always has been in any of our processes. You know, if you think about the 30s semi, so loved by so much of our society, you know, it's basically the same plan, the same construction methodology, but with different finishes to give a degree of personalization to it. And again, if we look at the housing that we all love, things like Georgian housing, it's very repetitive. So, you know, but it's about the beauty of what you're producing. And again, if I think about the modular schools of the 50s, again, you know, highly regarded design-wise. So that's kind of where I wanted to go as a brief introduction to everybody else. In summary, what I would say is, you know, I think all of those drivers are meaning that the stars have now aligned for modern methods of construction generally, and that includes things like BIM, but also for modular and far more off-site production. And we'll see some great examples, I'm sure, in a minute. And I think the last thing I would say is, you know, can a business afford not to go down these routes in this increasingly digital world where we are being driven to speed and affordability? So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ben. That was a really insightful way to start. Next up, we have Cathal, who I'm going to hand over to right now. And I think things are going to kick off with a video that we're going to start with. Yeah, so I'm going to mute myself again.
Morning, and as Jordan has said, I'm Cathal McMullen, and I am the MD for Kane Group. We're going to play a short video for a project that we've recently completed, which highlights some of the things that have already been mentioned in Ben's presentation, but just put them into the practical application there on site, and hopefully it'll give you a bit of a better insight of what we've done. Jordan, if we can play, please.
The Claridge's project required a full-service MEP delivery to manage the installation of quite complex and complicated services within a very confined site.
Kane Group's main challenges was to omit the risk of any disruption to the live hotel, to integrate the new mechanical and electrical systems with no disruptions.
Off-site fabrication was key to the success of the project. That relies heavily on good production facilities and processes and procedures with the facilities that we have in-house.
When we came on board, we carried out a point cloud survey, and this survey allowed us to make sure that our design was accurate for what we were going to install. Within the BIM department then, at that point, we kind of use it for space planning and coordination. That then moves into the prefabrication department, and they add the level of detail that allows it all to be made.
We take the drawings from design, we will prepare a cut list. Every weld here is tested. Then we bring it out to the spray shed, and then it's brought into assembly.
From the prefabrication, then the point cloud surveys on site allow those prefab items to be manufactured here and put straight on the site without needing welding on site and without needing storage on site.
Kane Group achieved excellent communication through a cloud-based system, which was a one-stop shop for both employees and the clients.
The Claridge's project was a very challenging but a very rewarding one.
From the very first site visit with the client, when they explained to us their vision and what they were trying to deliver, and when we saw what they'd already undertaken, we were hooked on the project. We were determined that this was the type of project that Kane can deliver and will deliver.
The end results speak for themselves.
Okay, thank you, John, for that. And hopefully I'll give everybody a bit of an insight in this particular project, which we believe is very relevant for today's presentation, really on how technology is supporting the rise of modular construction. As you can see, and quite a few of you will already be aware of the large-scale basement construction that happened at the Claridge's Hotel, and our remit on the project was obviously to install the full MEP services there in the lower levels. So this is B-5 shown on the slide here. And when we engaged in the project, we knew from the start that we were going to it was going to take a lot of digital input. This is a central London location sitting off Mayfair, and there's a lot of large equipment to come in and to work 5 stories below ground, and we knew right away that we were going to have to bring all the strands of the different services we offer to the project. So as it alludes to there, and it's shown on, so that we had to do a full scan survey of the thing and create a digital model. Then in that allowed us to draw our services and our design stuff into it, their spatial coordination, which then allowed it actually going to fit, and it's going to fit in a serviceable manner. And then from there, we integrated our virtual reality, both 2 hubs, one at head office at our off-site facility, and one on site. So it allowed close collaboration as to how is this going to work, how are the sections going to be delivered to site, and everyone from the client's team, our own team, had already, the picture was developed in their head as we were allowed to, the virtual reality sessions to show exactly the methodology for delivering to site, transporting to final location, and final fixings into it. We also used the scan survey for precise marking out on site for anchor points and fixing levels, so that we were able to go in and pre-drill all the areas and fit our modulars exactly where they were intended to go within the facility. So very, very precise setting out, and that came from the off-site staff. Everything was made to precision setting out, and everyone knew where it was to be located when it got to site, which enhanced a great enhancement on the project delivery for us. On-site reporting then, so obviously all of our drawings and all of our stuff was supported through the cloud-based system with Viewpoint for document storage and document control and handling systems. And then on site we used Field View for our recording and reporting, and our QR coding for permits to work on all of those side of things. So there was a lot of digital collaboration on this project, right from the very early stages, from when we were looking at the concept here and how we would do it, right through till the final delivery, the test and commissioning, the linked up reports that came through for quality and our final sign-offs, and then at the very last for the asset tagging, which we have done for all of the equipment. And this has led into us then securing the facilities management sector of the project just as recently as last week. So it is really seamless end to end, and the real benefits come from that joined up continual information thread passing from design through into our off-site, onto on-site, and the delivery handover, and then FM side of the project, and the central collaboration has been key to that for us. And our real benefits that we have seen from the approach are enhanced health and safety. Obviously, was a massive consideration for us from the outside. The quality, the efficiency, and the overall end product have been enhanced, and we have been successful in bringing a client team with us on the journey from the start to the end in a very collaborative and fulfilling way for them. So those have been our big advantages from this particular project, and these are transferable skills out into all other projects. We work on various different sectors within the London market, and all of these digital skills and offsite skills, they're all transferable as we can see them into other sectors. So it's not specifically for one particular industry, it's transferable through them all, and we would be big supporters of the digital integration and all the assistance it can bring to construction project. And that's everything that I have for you today. Hopefully it was provided you with some insight.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much. I know that there was a couple of people who had some issues seeing the video. Sorry, I should have flagged beforehand. That sometimes does happen in these presentations. But if you go to the on-demand link, which is the same link you've registered by now, you will be able to see it in that. So that will be available within half an hour of us wrapping up at the end of the discussion, the on-demand link, which for everybody who's also asking about whether the slides will be available, they will also be available via the on-demand link. So to cover off those two questions, which we've had a couple of, now everything will be available by the same link that you're joined now once we've wrapped. So next up, we have Stephen, who I might just ask you to unmute and turn your camera on, Stephen. I'll give you presenter mode now.
Okay, thank you. I'm hoping everybody can see me and hear me.
That's all set up perfectly.
Has that come up with the slide as well, Jordan? Is that?
Yeah, it has. It looks perfect.
Great. Okay, fine. Well, I don't know about that. Thank you very much, Jordan, for the intro, and good to meet everybody. As has been said, my name is Stephen Whiteman. I'm the UK MMC lead for Faithful and Gould. Just a bit of context to start with. It's interesting hearing what both Ben and Cathal had to say. I think Ben's comment's quite interesting that 15 years ago he sort of got infected with the idea of MMC and offsite. I have to admit to a similar sort of nirvana or a road to Damascus moment, if you like, when I joined this industry 23 years ago, having come from a manufacturing base. I bought my first new built, site-built home the same day I started work in the industry, so that was quite an interesting context setting environment for me as somebody coming from manufacturing. And I think for me, the context of what's different now is this time we're seeing carrot and stick, and we're seeing really good incentives and drivers from the government to actually adopt MMC. And I use MMC as a global term rather than focusing on modular, so I think that's quite interesting. I think the other comment, just from reference to what Cathal said, there's quite a lot of focus with MMC with regards to new build. And it's quite often overlooked that there are significant benefits to the use of MMC and offsite construction in the refurb market. And a fantastic example of the ability of MMC to deliver low levels of disruption and to allow an existing estate to be maintained and continue its operational processes. And we see that particularly strongly in sectors such as healthcare, where you're talking about extensions to hospitals, or education, building on the existing estate. But a really good example of something that's not necessarily thought about that often. So just a couple of things that from my point of view, I think are useful reference points. Okay, so technology and the growth of MMC, and I'm specifically using the term MMC because for me, it's a cross-industry issue. Just to sort of get started, if I make sure that my slides are going to move on. Advert over first. F&G and our sister company Atkins are part of SNC-Lavalin, a Canadian company, a globally fully integrated professional services and project management company. Some of the things I'm going to talk about are Atkins based in this particular context, but I actually operate within Faithful and Gould. So I'm going to just have a quick look at the Homes England study and how the technology that we've implemented there and looked at and how we're developing that. I'm going to have a little bit of a general look at MMC manufacturing and how I see technology being implemented and used in those areas. I'm fortunate that I get to visit a lot of MMC factories. I think it's about 10 or 11 in the last 2 months. So I get to see an awful lot of what is going on in the industry, which is really good. And 1 or 2 thoughts about where perhaps the future needs to go to really increase and drive the uptake. And not just looking at the technology with regards to a sort of digital piece and the piece around things like data, but also actually things like materials and techniques. So there's some interesting developments I think that we're starting to see. So first of all, I just wanted to do a context set because for me, MMC, or modern methods of construction, there's a key issue here, and it comes back to Ben's point about beauty. There is no reason why it should have any impact on what's actually produced, because it's a process, not a product. The clue's in the title. It's a method of delivering buildings via different processes, absolutely more efficient, better designed processes, but it is not specifically about a product. And I think that's really quite important from a context setting. And if people don't take anything away from this apart from that thought, for me, that's the key metric to getting people to think about this in the right way. It's about the process, not the product. Okay, Homes England. A number of you are probably aware of this particular project. Apologies if I'm teaching anybody to things that they already know. But Homes England's study into modern methods of construction, and it is specifically modern methods, not just modular. There's 1,500 homes across 8 sites, and we're currently looking at 6 providers for those homes. There are a range of technologies being involved. So we've got some are volumetric. The picture on the right is of the urban splash houses, and the picture at the bottom is North Stowe, which is their urban splash development in Cambridgeshire. The sites are ranged across the UK, across the south and central England, and up to the northeast of England. And there are, say, a variety of different technologies being adopted. Panelized, there is timber framed, there's light gauge steel framing, there's timber frame volumetric, steel frame volumetric. So it's a really good broad spectrum of approaches. Partners on this particular study are Homes England, University College London, the BRE, Atkins, and Faithful and Gould. And what we're looking at is the sort of 15 key themes to this question about these homes and this MMC process. And it's around things like the pace of delivery, the costs, labor, productivity, etc. Things like planning, pre-manufactured value, what the safety benefits are, waste, logistics, delivery quality, etc., etc. So I think there's a variety of, say, these 15 key themes, which are then split out into a number of sort of sub data points that are influencing that process. And the interesting point there is that we had a number of challenges, and largely around technology issues, and principally around the lack of common data collection methods. There are various data collection and data storage methods around the various businesses and individuals and organizations that we're engaging with. That's resulting in variable data quality. There are also things like project and site variables to consider, and there may well be external influences in the process. I should point out that we're only in the early stages of this particular process at the moment. None of these projects are, as far as I'm aware, yet on site. I'm not actually directly involved in the project, but as far as I'm aware, none of them are actually on site at the moment. But we've set the data parameters and we've started putting together the data collection processes. So in terms of the technology, the key was looking at a data quality framework, ensuring that the data was consistent, that we had a consistent framework, and we had 10 key steps in that data quality framework. We also needed to implement a common data platform. There were a number of platforms we looked at. There are platforms of involvement with people like the RICS and the CLC and the BRE, but there didn't appear to be a single platform approach that would capture all the data that we needed for the project. So we actually implemented a platform called Atkins Assist, which is a pretty robust platform that's being used day to day. At peak, it's been used to record up to 40,000 data points in a single day. So that's a robust system, works across multiple platforms and tablet cloud-based solution. We used existing guidelines for this data collection and the data points wherever possible. So I say guidelines presented and existing metrics developed by the RICS and the CLC. And we also incorporated other tools such as BRE Smart Waste and other data tools outside of the Atkins envelope to try and make this as common a framework as possible. So the outputs, sorry, going up a slide, didn't we go forward again? So the outcomes, what we believe we're going to see from this, and we're just starting to test this now, is a very high quality data set. We think this will provide a set of new measurement standards for the industry, and standards that importantly will be cross-platform, so they will work for the modular build, they will work for the panelized build and the other categories of MMC, and potentially for even the category 5 MMC, such as Cathal is doing, where you're talking about non-structural sub-assemblies. We believe that this should allow developer self-assessments of their progress and processes and allow them to get improvements in their process. And key, really, from our perspective, and certainly from my interest, is the hope that this will actually increase the development of automation within the industry, which is, I think, going to be one of the key elements of where we need to take this process over the coming years. That leads me on to the question about technology in MMC manufacturing. The idea of this is just to give you an overview, and if somebody wants to get in touch to talk a bit more about the Homes England study, please feel free. So technology in MMC manufacturing. I've been involved, as I said, for a number of years, 23 years in this business, and one of the comments that's commonly thrown at the industry is, oh, it's just construction in a shed. And I think commonly that was how it was approached. What we're starting to see now, though, is we're starting to see different metrics coming in and the use of technology, and particularly the first one really is in shop floor data. Live data terminals, live data information. Cathal talked about what they were doing in their business. We're seeing tablet-based approaches for drawings and details, information flows across the systems. QR code work logging. Cathal also showed that process that they've implemented. We're seeing that, and interestingly, don't forget MMC can also mean site-based improvements in materials and labour as well. So we are starting to see QR code being used broadly both on-site and off-site. And for me, it's a connected process. The idea of an operative logging his time, logging the data, logging the materials, so traceability. RFID tagging as well, seeing some interesting developments in that area. Also thinking there about the use of embodied, or the examination of embodied carbon and the use of technology to monitor embodied carbon in production processes to actually fully track what materials have been used, what the embodied carbon was in those materials and how that waste process. Embedded performance monitoring. I know of a number of organizations who are actually embedding performance monitoring systems in their buildings. And I think Matt, I don't know whether Matt's going to touch on that, but Reds have done some interesting work there in the net zero space with the Ministry of Defence in their work, and Matt might just touch on that in his presentation that follows mine. And we're also seeing cloud-based cradle to grave QA processes, tablet-based processes, logging that QA process right from cradle to grave. Right through to the site operations, and in a common data environment where clients are actually able to access that data live and see what the progress is, and potentially the benefits of that to go right through to things like valuations and that sort of process of managing and monitoring the whole construction process right through. Picture on the right hand side is from Ilka's factory. They are using an interestingly hybrid situation at the moment. They've got automated technology for things like panel build, CNC, and pre-assembly. And then they're working with largely manual-based processes for their post-box process. So we're seeing at the moment a bit more of a hybrid solution. In production processes, automated cutting and assembly is becoming now common for primary items. The picture on the right is of Lang O'Rourke's factory, Explore factory in Worksop, and there they are actually working now on a data process where the molds for the concrete panels are actually set out from a digital data input with no human interaction. So that's done automatically with magnetized shuttering onto bases, delivered direct from the digital envelope, and even the batching of the concrete and the concrete quantities that comes in from their batching plant is delivered in, measured and aggregated from the digital data and then poured. So you're seeing a very high level of automatic assembly process in that area. What we're also starting to see in the space is process breakdown. So we're starting to see, even in the modular space now, the use of process breakdown to sub-assembly and process materials and components and products into sub-assemblies to speed up the manufacturing process. And particularly in the housing sector, a number of the housing manufacturers are looking at this process to reduce their cycle times. Historically, in modular build, a typical module would have a cycle time of between 20 and 25 days in a shop floor environment from the day the first element was laid down to sort of being ready to move it out the door. Manufacturers are now getting those cycle times down to 16 days, 10 days, and even 8 days by the use of sub-assemblies and third-party supply chains, in much the same way as the car industry does, where nothing that's fitted into the car, dashboard, seats, those kind of things, are actually manufactured by the primary manufacturer. They're manufactured by their third-party supply chain. And I'm just going to look at a specific example of this at the moment, how that technology embedding is working. Polypipe are doing a bit of work at the moment in sub-assemblies as part of the overall piece. And this is again very similar to what Cathal was talking about, but on a smaller scale and more repetitious scale. So they're using the GA Revit model with the M&E detail superimposed. They're then looking at sub-assembling that componentry into their system, creating a digital twin, and that's generating the automatic manufacturing details. And they manufacturing these elements of work, from sort of plumbing works, particularly bathroom backboards and the like. Now that board that's shown there on the right is generated from a set of CNC components. So all those components and elements are cut on the CNC machines. Even the lengths of pipe are automatically cut, and they're delivered to an assembly process. The backboard is machined, it's laser engraved with all the pipe positions and locations and QR coded. So all of that arrives at an assembly point to put that process together. It doesn't require a plumber or skilled labor. It's an elemental process that can be done with people who are trained specifically for the job. And interestingly, the influence of that on operations is really quite interesting. One of the areas that's interesting for offsite is the ability for offsite to offer opportunities for ED&I, so for inclusivity, for people who find working in construction sites perhaps more challenging. And when I went around their Polypipe facility recently, 75% of their shop floor operatives were female, which I think is a really interesting situation, because it's a less physical operation and the ability to work in a more flexible environment with different working practices. So that may well assist in some of these problems with getting over A, the skilled trade requirement, and B, the requirement for people to travel to construction sites and the challenges that brings. Finally, I just wanted to look at some of my thoughts of what I see and where this might go for the future. And this is more about technology of materials and processes and those kind of things, rather than necessarily the digital technology. We're seeing some interesting things now about robotics and 3D printed elements and data capture and workflow. The picture on the right was taken at Lang's factory, and that is a project that we are working on for S5 for Argent at King's Cross. And it's a brick facade encapsulated into a concrete structural frame. But every one of those bricks was placed manually in that mold, and the mold was manufactured manually. It was CNC'd timber components, but then assembled manually, and every one of the bricks was inserted manually. Major opportunity for robotics to actually take a digital drawing, place those bricks automatically from a robotic perspective, and then the casting process to take place. So interesting thoughts about how that process might be developed. 3D printed elements, there are people now 3D printing whole buildings, but also thinking about 3D printing things like brickworks and facades. And there are a number of manufacturers now looking at those processes. And data capture and workflows I've already mentioned to an extent. I think the final thoughts from me in terms of where technology is going is, I think the industry starts to need to think about manufacturing-based materials as well. Things like dry finishes and dry jointing. How do we get away from the need to introduce wet trades? Because in a manufacturing environment, those really are a challenge. If you look in your car, if you sit in a car these days, there are no wet finished products in there. There's no painting visible. Everything's dry finished and is just clicked into place. And we really need to think about moving the technology on and getting acceptance of those kind of materials for the industry. Things like heating systems, plug and play all electric systems rather than wet systems, which are more difficult to make connections, particularly in a volumetric system. And I think changes in the building regulations, the move towards renewables and electrics is also going to be interesting. And what I'm hoping to see is that the technology from the provider side is going to start catching up with the needs that the industry might have from those kind of plug and play solutions. So a few thoughts from me. Thank you for your attention. I'm sure if you've got any questions, they'll go into the chat, and I'll hand over to Matt Benyon, who will take you through his view on technology.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Stephen. Yeah, Matt, I'll just hand you over presenter mode now. And keep those questions coming in. We have heaps already, but we're going to try and cover up as much as we can in the Q&A. So I'll pass over to Matt.
Thank you, Jordan. And I'll try and make sure that we're quick, actually, so that we leave enough time for those questions. So I work on the basis that all this is coming through perfectly.
Yeah,
so
if you just put your slides into presenter mode for us, that would be really great.
Brilliant. That should now be up.
Yeah,
so just comment a few things that other people have touched on. So Ben sort of positioned that, you know, when you read the book, I guess, there are lots of things that off-site construction should deliver, volumetric construction should deliver, and how much better it should be. I guess the point in history is that it hasn't always been bankable, and that, I think, is a reflection of our very siloed industry. Which, you know, really came out in what Steve was talking about with Homes England, trying to sort of solve that fragmentation. And it also comes from perhaps using traditional business models to try and solve you know, problems using new technologies. So I'll perhaps just start by offering up a point of view that actually technology is transformational. We're certainly feeling that, and we think that it's transforming the way that we operate, and it's bringing transformative possibilities to the industry. But it only gets you so far. It is just an enabler, and I think we need to remember that. It's about having the right product. It's about having the right business model, in particular with the processes that support that, and then using technology to underpin that. That, in our view, is what creates a compelling proposition. And you know, just the point Ben made earlier as well about beauty. What technology is doing is it's allowing design to be configured around standard details. You know, those standard details, if you like, provide a platform around which all sorts of customization is possible. Some of the technology we'll look at in a minute allows us to customize the buildings that we produce. Yes, around a standard steel volumetric frame solution. But to actually create buildings that have great architectural integrity. And that's the key here. We can do all we like with square boxes, but if the market doesn't want square boxes, the planners certainly don't want them, then you've not got the right product. So all of those things need to come together. And from our perspective of Reds 10, we are a full turnkey design and build contractor. We use steel frame volumetric, and we look to do that with a completely vertically integrated approach. And what that's trying to do is it's really trying to treat our business as a platform. It's trying to make sure that we're in control at each stage of the process. If you go back to those benefits, you know, it is the old adage, and it is true, I'm afraid, that the benefits increase the earlier you engage. And the point is, under the traditional business models, we tried to pull people up from the back end and bring them into the front end. Actually, what's required is a completely different business model that enables all of those things to do, where an integrator takes the lead and everybody's you know, roles come together as part of that process. And I was going to talk about three, if you like, transformative elements from technology from my perspective, just very quickly. One is the power of a fully federated model. And people talk about this, but there's a huge difference between talking about it and actually doing it properly. The second is about the enablement of workflows. And then the third, which Steve talked about, was the capture and reuse of operational data. So how is the building performing in use, and what do we learn from that? How can that inform design moving forward? So if we come back to this point about the power of a fully federated model, the fact that we now have connected central data, and that's possible in the cloud environment, which basically means that the federated model can sync every hour, genuinely creates the opportunity for design teams and site teams to come together and be working on exactly the same model at the same time. Now, there's nothing new in there. What's perhaps I've just sort of flagged, though, is that quite a lot of times what we see is design teams working on the front end that put a model together, that when it goes over to the contractor or the subcontractors, frankly, it gets put in the bin. And the model has to be started again. So it's about creating that model that can flow all the way through the life of the project. Once that model is in place, you can track all your project issues and have create that golden thread. We can plug in all sorts of other softwares that enable lots of clever things to be done, and I'm going to talk about some of those as we go through. And here's an example of a 2-form entry primary school. We're currently working on the DFE fully federated model, and without off-site volumetric, the coordination of the site, the coordination of the services and the pop-ups through the buildings are absolutely critical. We also like to make sure that we have a very high level of PMV. We work on the basis that the minute you hit site, you lose money. And that's because site processes are wasteful processes. In the factory, we can control those processes. So using the fully federated model, we can have a fully coordinated design. We can understand where the issues are. We can understand, using the GIS information, exactly where foundations have been put in, exactly where the services are. We can coordinate a much higher degree of services, sprinklers, into the factory construction. And ultimately what that looks like is 85–90% of pre-manufactured value completed within the factory. And here just 2 examples: a school at the bottom, some transit accommodation for the MOD at the top, where you can see the level of completeness that's being achieved in the factory, and how that is finished up on site. And the point here is even in the last 12 months, probably 12 months ago, that wasn't really possible. But the way in which the software has developed, the way in which the understanding of creating a common data environment, the fact that we use a vertically integrated business model, which means that the suppliers and the architects and everybody are working to the same model across the life of the project, enables this to happen. It also means that we can lock down the manufacturer and the scope of that manufacturing, the bill of materials much quicker, and that means we can proceed to manufacture a lot earlier. And the main point is we can do that with the comfort of knowing that our customers have walked through the building, they have experienced it, they're happy with it, and that we have mitigated the risk that we would traditionally see. So here what we're looking at is the use of laser scanning and the integration of that into the BIM model, which again, as I was saying, reduces some of the issues that perhaps used to stand in the way of full adoption of all of the benefit of volumetric construction, because we're getting live feed between how things have been completed within the factory, so that the site understand what's coming out of the factory and could be ready for that. And equally, while the enabling works, the infrastructure works are going on site, picking up that data and actually having that in the model as well. And again, eliminating some of those manufacturing issues, which used to mean that you were essentially just putting a bit of lipstick on a steel box. Nowadays means, as those earlier pictures show, we can pretty much finish the above ground building, not in its entirety, but to a very high degree, which eliminates wasteful on-site processes. Here, I'm just making a point of that clash detection can go right the way down to the FF&E and the M&E right at the very outset of a project. So, we're now configuring buildings with our clients, enable, through the use of standard details, through the integration of all of the models, even the FF&E, to actually take school teachers through their building as part of the early stakeholder engagement and management process. So right at the very front. So our configuration is quicker, our fabrication is quicker, and because we're doing more in the factory, we're now starting to see the benefit in terms of the on-site delivery. The last area on the federated model is that the automation of workflows does create that golden thread that Ben was talking about earlier. So here we have in our platform 300 standard details that the basic design is configured around, both in 2D and 3D, with the specifications and the scheduling, including the parameters in that design, which all means that configuration can happen a lot quicker. And part of that is, as we learn things about the process, as we learn things about the detail, we're able to feed that back in. And when you think about it, a building comes out of our factory gates every 4 weeks or so. So every single building gets the benefit of that learning, and that's very, very different to traditional construction, where you might sit in a lessons learned workshop, but actually the relevance of that to the next product or to the next building is minimal, and much of that learning just goes in the bin. So what technology allows volumetric to do is to capture that learning and to reapply it very, very quickly. And the same is true for building performance data in use. About 2 years ago, we took the decision to invest in KNX wiring inside a building. And off the back of that, we've created Thrive, which is our system for the low carbon operation of buildings. So not only do the standard details that we produce and the way in which we fabricate and use technology and use the learning that comes out of that technology to improve our processes, which means we get much higher air tightness than traditional construction, which gives us a low EPC rating and energy rating for the building. As Ben mentioned earlier, the majority of carbon is used in the operation of the building, and that is driven by human usage. So what we've done is we've started to use smart technology within the buildings to provide our customers with an understanding of how the buildings are performing, how humans are interfacing with the building, and how much carbon that's costing them, and how, using that data, you can actually harness a better end user experience. You can continue to improve the performance of the building, because you can actually see whether you've over-specified the size of plant. You can improve the operating costs and the maintenance costs, because you can see whether the things are being used as they should be. And most importantly, you can harness that data back into the front end of design. And taking my point about buildings coming down the line or out of the factory gate every 4 weeks, you can actually get that back into the standard design. So here, what I'm suggesting is technology is actually an accelerator. That all of this that we're talking about here can be done with traditional construction, but much, much slower. So this is an accelerator for the greening of our clients' estate. So coming back to that point I made earlier about how bankable are some of these benefits. Well, just to take two examples here. So working with the DFE, using the technology that we're talking about, using the configuration, the standard details, and having that common data environment with live data is enabling us to get buildings through planning and through design, school buildings, in 18 weeks, to produce them in 14 weeks in the factory, and to install them on site in 36 weeks, obviously with the infrastructure and substructure works being parallel within there. If you look at the NetCap, which is the transit accommodation program, all carbon zero buildings, and if you look at the learning just across that program, which has been fed back building to building to building, we've seen the EPC rating from the initial prototype drop from an A with a score of 12 down to an A+, with a rating of -8. So here, just two examples where we're seeing a level of benefit that just wasn't possible without the technology. So I'm going to hand back to you just there, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Matt. I will just ask, I'll just ask everyone if you could please turn your cameras and mics back on, and we'll jump into the Q&A. Brilliant, everyone's here. So I think maybe a good way to kick it off is we've had a question come in asking how well is the industry, and in particular clients, embracing the adoption and use of technology, and are they willing to invest so that the supply chain can in turn invest in the technology and infrastructure required to deliver with modern methods of construction. Matt, might click on you first.
Yeah. Well, what I'd say is generally the public sector is doing it a lot better than the private sector. If you take the Department for Education, you take the MOD, probably the MOJ, I would say in there as well. Really with the catalyst of the construction industry playbook, Steve referenced the carrot and stick. That really is creating an imperative. There's a comply or explain why element to the construction playbook, and what they've done that is different is they've created a procurement approach that enables the supply chain to actually invest in technology, to invest in the standardization. They've done that by thinking programmatically, and they've done that by focusing on output specifications rather than trying to control the inputs. So that would be my first offering. Public sector probably embracing it a lot more than private sector.
Did anyone else have any thoughts on that they wanted to jump in with?
Yeah, I think it's just to pick up the same point that Matt just made. If you look at the Affordable Housing or Affordable Home Building Fund, 25% mandate for MMC, which is the sort of the carrot stroke stick, and the DFE side that Matt's just talked about. The KPI of PMV is actually driving the performance of the providers within the MMC1 framework, and those who will get the better PMV scores will get more choice. I think the technology side, the specific in question was investment in technology. I think we are seeing that happening to a degree. I think it needs to be driven partially by the supply chain, though, with the benefits coming from the supply chain side, as Matt's said. You know, the manufacturers do see those benefits. They see those benefits of standardization, and we're starting to see one or two. Ilka Homes, for example, are actually saying we will build standard size houses because we can see those benefits, and they're trying to push that now the other way, back to the client side, which is happening. We are starting to see that. So.
Ben, it looked like you wanted to jump in just before.
I was just going to concur. One of the lovely things about my job is that I get to go into lots of different businesses and see what people are doing with technologies. And I would concur absolutely that the drive to MMC seems to be happening more uniformly within the public sector than within the private. In the private, things are very mixed. So there are some people, some companies which are really high-end adopters and who are investing heavily in technology, and there are, you know, all of the problems that our industry's always faced about, you know, having been quite fractured and siloed and having many different players on different sites. So those are all things which have been in the past barriers. I think we're going to see the ones who are adopting grow and grow, and the ones who don't, not.
Brilliant. Keppel, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Really, just to reflect the other side of it, is a lot of our works are within the private sector, and yes, I would agree there. It's more of a model whereby we've invested into it and we're very much proving to our clients the benefits of it. So they're not being forced towards it, but we're showing them the benefits of it, and we're convincing them with the methods that we're using. But that's building in momentum, and increasingly clients are more and more, once it's demonstrated and fit to be demonstrated in a practical manner on site, then the uptake is very quick then and we're finding good success in that way. But yes, depending on the client, but quite a lot of the times it's driven by ourselves through on that point in the private side, and then we're seeing that come, say, once they're convinced.
I think that's an important point. Sorry, on the private side, it tends to be supply chain push rather than demand side pull, which you see in the public sector. And the difference is there's more of a willingness in the public sector to embrace different commercial models. The private sector very wedded to traditional ways of doing things, which is not actually getting the best out of technology, the best out of supply chain.
Okay, brilliant. So I think that probably covers that one off. We had like 4 or 5 people ask this same question. It's for Stephen, and I think it's probably a fairly simple one for you to answer, I hope.
Hope so.
And it was about whether there were plans to share the data standard requirements, as people are working on their own internal data standards and would like to be able to align them with wider standards when available. And if so, is there a timeline for that?
I don't know the specific answer, I'm afraid, because I'm not that close to the project. I believe there will be a degree of data sharing, because what's the point in developing a common data standard if you don't share it? But I can't tell you when that's going to be. As I say, we don't actually have any active data yet. We've just started gathering it. The first phase, there is a first phase report available on the Homes England website. So if you go to .gov.uk Homes England, there is the first part of the report talking about the common data environment and some of the parts of the process. But if anybody wants to reach out to me separately, I can potentially put them in touch with the team who are actually running that project day to day, and they may be able to help.
Brilliant.
I hope that's not dodged the question too much.
No, that was great. Cathal, this one was for you. Did you inherit 3D design from a design consultant to S3 or S4 level and then edit it to make it suitable for modular construction, or do you design MEP from concept all the way through to construction? And how sorry, there's one more to this question. And how can MEP designers work to optimize the design for modular construction at the earliest stage?
Well, we developed the design all the way through from, so there was a design obviously in place, or a concept design for it, but it wasn't designed with offsite or modular in mind. And so whenever we embraced the project at the time, we sat down with the client's team and then really worked it back, the design back, and then took it forward with the modular concept in mind with it. So it had to change fundamentally in that regard, and how the delivery goes off it. But that's blending two things, which are design knowledge and buildability, which are two specific skill sets. So the design of it and how you're actually going to build it, and then blend it with manufacturing, with what makes it that you can do offsite with it. So it's really integrating those systems and what any design. This question's from a design perspective. Are you asking me? Sorry, Jordan, it's quite a long question. I missed.
Yeah, I know. So essentially, it was like, how can, this was specifically MEP, but I suppose design teams as a whole, how can they start working to be able to deliver on modular as early as possible, I suppose?
I think, and I suppose it's a common theme for everybody, early selection and engagement with the person who can deliver what you're looking for. You need to that early stage on to avoid a board of works or fixed mindsets as to the actual delivery of the project. So the earlier that you can get involved with it, so I suppose selecting a team that can deliver offsite with it and engaging them early, so that we don't get too far designed or too far along a line of thinking that means that the modular concepts can't be adapted, or we've made building decisions, be it civil decisions or structural decisions, or that then preclude modular or as much modular. So really early engagement and onboarding of the right delivery teams is key. That's probably the most important thing for us anyway.
Did anyone else have any thoughts on this? Because I've already run over, so this might have to be the last question, but did anyone else have any thoughts about supply chain engagement and how best it is to, how early in the process people should be thinking offsite modular MMC? Does anyone else have any thoughts they wanted to come in on there?
The industry will always say to you they want to engage as early as possible. The challenge is that clients find that it's a bit of an anathema to some clients, because they don't like the thought that they're going to be pasted into a corner, that they're going to have to be committed to somebody. I think the reality is it depends on a project by project basis, and it also depends on the quality of the team who are assisting the client. If the team understand and they can maintain an open protocol, and I've seen projects where projects come down to stage 4 and it still could have been delivered in multiple solutions. It could have been delivered in volumetric or panelized or timber frame or steel or whatever. But I've also seen projects that arrive at stage 4, and I'm sure Cathal has, where you think, crikey, I wish you'd talked to us earlier, or talk to somebody who knew what they were talking about. And Matt knows that, because that's exactly what happens when you receive a project. I think it's difficult to say as a one size fits all, Jordan. I think the key is the level of understanding of the pre-construction teams needs to improve. We've got to try and upskill and train them and make them understand what actually works and what doesn't, and deliver a more holistic process overall. But I'm hoping to retire in 10 years' time. Whether we'll get there before I pack up, I'm not sure.
Matt, did you have any thoughts?
Just say from a volumetric perspective that there is too much old school thinking, if you like, in terms of this is the way the industry is currently set up and this is how we need to engage. So we complete a design to a certain level, and then we go and find out what our options were. So I'm just echoing Steve's version there. One of the concerns has always been, is there enough of a supply chain there for people that we can go to and who will integrate from stage 1 all the way through? That moment is here. Technology is enabling that, and I would encourage people to break the mold because the benefits that I think all of us have spoken about are real now. They are bankable, and there isn't that kind of fear factor there anymore.
I think you're also, Jordan, seeing the growth of what I would call MMC contractors, not just MMC suppliers. So you're seeing people, and Reds is an example, where they're actually taking the project from cradle to grave and doing the whole thing, rather than having to go through main contractor routes. And that's streamlining the process, it's providing that vertical integration, and that is certainly improving the opportunities within the industry to engage and deliver good projects.
Ben, any last thoughts from you before we wrap up for the day?
Not really, just agree with those last comments. We looked back in 2011 at Paul Morell's UK government construction strategy. The vast bulk of that was about the early appointment of supply chain and construction team members. And it is important for the delivery of, unless we get to a stage where we've got a whole, if you like, series of different kits of parts that designers can use, which are standard and developed enough that they are common. It's got to be this way. I think we have to find more ways of getting more of the industry to appoint early.
Brilliant. I'd like to say a huge thank you, first of all, to our panel. That was a really informative chat. We've had so many people asking if it will be available on demand. Yes, via the exact same link that you used to join just now. Within half an hour of us clocking off here, it will be available on demand. And please feel free to share that on-demand link with others in your company or other people who you think might enjoy the presentation, because it's available and free to everyone. Secondly, I would just like to thank the audience. I'm really sorry to everyone's questions we didn't get to. I know there was heaps there that we didn't get a chance to cover off, but I've already stolen more time than we had allotted for today. So if there's any that are addressed towards specific people, we'll try and get those passed over to the appropriate person. And so, yeah, we can try and do that for you guys. And I'd also like to thank Viewpoint for sponsoring the panel today, because it was a really great one. We had huge engagement, and I think the audiences all found it really valuable. So for me, that's it for today. Thanks again to everyone involved, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.